Hello and welcome to another episode of Cascadia Mountain Weather. My name is Kyle. I'm here with Wyatt, and since we're heading into fall, there's a lot of interesting things going on with the weather. So we're back and doing videos. This is a photo from past years around this time of year, but this is kind of what we're dealing with in the mountains right now. So the fall colors are really starting to get close to peak, but we still have a lot of haze and wildfire smoke in the area. So we're gonna cover like what's going on with smoke and also like is it gonna rain this weekend? So let's dive into it. We have quite a few fires burning around the state. We've had, pretty dry September so far, and we had particularly one very dry, warm easterly flow day earlier this week that definitely made the fire situation worse. So we're going to take a look at a few of the fires in particular. This is just kind of showing like the heat that's coming out from different fires across the state. So the Bear Gulch fire has been burning since 4th of July weekend around Lake Cushman in the Southeast Olympics. And you can see all the yellow dots. That's like where there's active burning versus like the total extent of the fire. And that section that's actively burning, that's actually all completely new in the last few days, specifically on Tuesday when it was really warm and dry. So the fire basically doubled in size and moved up an entire valley in one day. Now, we're probably not going to see any more days like that, so hopefully it just kind of like burns where it is. But it does show just how like very particular weather conditions can get very explosive growth. On the east side, there's kind of two main fires around Leavenworth. There's one in the Teanaway area, kind of closing off all the roads and trails there. We'll talk more about that later. And then there's the Lower Sugarloaf fire closer to the town of Entiat. And that one's been moving quite fast. It's in, sparse ponderosa forests and desert shrubland. So it's moving very quickly. This is the time of year where there's often a lot of closures due to fires, and this year is no exception. So, a few major areas, all the stuff in the southeast corner of the Olympics. Now, I know you don't see any closure in the national park. That's because this is a national forest map. Basically, all that's closed. Then there's a pretty big area just east of Mount Rainier in Chinook Pass, the Wildcat Fire. And then up around the Teanaway. Basically, all of the core Teanaway is closed up to kind of the boundary with Ingalls Creek. And so I know this is a very popular area for larches in the fall. That to remain closed. And the closure kind of extends all the way to Blewett Pass. And then a huge swath of land north of US 2 in Leavenworth is close to the Sugarloaf fire. And then all that upper closure above Lake Wenatchee, that's due to the Pomus fire, which has not really been doing much for the last month or so, but that was closed earlier this summer and it remains closed. And then there's additionally closures in the North Fork Sauk, which is the popular access point for Glacier Peak. So there's not a major fire there, just a small one, but enough that they've closed the trails. So smoke is definitely going to be a concern this weekend. This shows vertically integrated smoke, so it's not necessarily like surface level smoke, but kind of just like smoke throughout the whole atmosphere. And we're watching it move through Friday. So Friday, the smoke's gonna kind of be pretty bad across a lot of the Cascades. I mean, it's never going to be like bad at surface or especially like in the lowlands, but they'll definitely impede the views a lot. And then as we go into Saturday, the winds come back out of the west and they start clearing things out. And so, yeah, like Saturday, this is Saturday morning, and this is the latest run. It's looking pretty good across most of the Cascades. You can kind of see like remnants of the Bear Gulch fire blowing up across like the northwestern Cascades. Um, and, this isn't like super reliable, this forecast. So we'll continue to monitor it. But the main themes that like Saturday should actually be a decent day in the mountains. I wouldn't expect it to be perfectly clear, but definitely decent visibility. The air should be healthy and it'll probably be actually clearing out more throughout the day. So maybe it's a day not to get a super early start because the better air will probably come later in the day.
Awesome. So now we can get into more of like, yeah, what the weather's going to look like and coming from the ground instead, or coming from the sky instead of what's coming from the ground. And as Kyle mentioned, we're going to start seeing more of a kind of a westerly push, as we do have not the strongest front ever coming through, but a decently strong front for September. Not particularly wet, but it will bring some stronger winds with it as we head later into the weekend. So this is going to be kind of the 3 hour precipitation, and we can see that Friday looks dry. As we start getting into Saturday, so this is Saturday in the early afternoon at 2 p.m., you can see some precipitation starting to come in off of the coast. And this is where the main push of precipitation comes in kind of the overnight hours on Saturday into Sunday. So it's likely going to remain dry for all of Saturday until kind of dark. Expect the first precipitation to come in maybe at like maybe 8 to 10 p.m., maybe a little bit later, maybe around midnight. And it's going to move through pretty quickly. So you can see that these are, let me just refresh this to make sure that we are getting this and bump this up. But you can see that, like, basically, this is kind of 2 a.m. Sunday showing this precipitation starting to move in, like North Cascades. It's already in the Olympics. And then by the time we hit, this is through 8 a.m. on Sunday. It's throughout kind of the Western Cascades, but then it really fades and disappears. So this is 8 through 11 a.m. on Sunday, and then 11 through 2 p.m. on Sunday. And you notice that there are still some showers hanging around the west side of the Cascades, and there might even be a kind of a weak convergence zone forming kind of in the central Washington Cascades. But the east side should be dry, and it's really not going to be super, super wet. If we look at total accumulated precipitation, we're thinking maybe a quarter to maybe a half inch, probably higher amounts a little bit further north, kind of north of Seattle and out towards the coast. And then the mountains might see an inch to an inch and a half in the highest spots on the west side. As you go further south, maybe closer to half an inch, and you go to the east side, maybe only a couple of showers, maybe a tenth of an inch or a quarter of an inch. And most of this, like I said, is going to be happening in the overnight hours to the morning hours on Sunday. So Sunday honestly should be a decent day, especially as you get east of the Cascades. Might be a little bit kind of cloudy and showery west of the Cascades. Now, since it is getting into fall, we're mid-September already, we can start kind of looking at our snow levels. And parts of the U.S. have started to see snow at the upper elevations. Generally, we won't see significant snow fall in the Cascades until the snow level drops to maybe like 6,500 or 7,000 feet. And you can see that the forecast for this weekend is kind of keeping it about 8,000 feet. So you might see some snowfall on the summits of the volcanoes. But it's pretty unlikely you're going to see anything much more than that, especially since the snow level drops after the bulk of the precipitation comes through. So maybe you'd see like a dusting of snow. But honestly, probably not even anything accumulating. It just might be some really cold rain, or some chunky rain at elevation overnight on Saturday night. Another story to talk about is actually the winds. It's going to be decently breezy. This is probably the strongest windstorm that we've had of this fall season, of this very young fall season. Expect wind gusts maybe in the kind of mid 20s to mid 30s, out along the water. And then at elevation, especially kind of as the front passes through and drops down the other side of the Cascades, you might see some gusts in the 30s to 40s. This is going to be happening as the front passes through, kind of in that Sunday morning hour, and into the afternoon on Sunday. So just be aware of that, that it might be breezy on that east side. Could honestly grow some of those fires with those winds picking up. But it will be a wetter sort of wind as well, instead of a super dry like east wind. So they might not grow as much as they would if the wind was blowing from the opposite direction. And just looking at temperatures, pretty normal. I like to always bring up this kind of 3,000 foot at Snoqualmie Pass. Not super representative of the Cascades as a whole, but it does show us sometimes that like Saturday's going to be a pretty nice day. Imagine 60s and 70s in the mountains. Sunday with that precipitation probably will start relatively cool. It might warm up as the day progresses. Imagine probably staying in the 50s in most places, maybe at upper elevations in the upper 40s, especially on the west side. And lows are going to be kind of pretty standard for this time of year, maybe low to mid 40s. So that's mostly what this weekend looks like. Saturday definitely is going to be the sunny day, even if there is going to be a little bit of smoke present. Sunday, especially on the east side, should be decent. It might be a little bit breezy, and the smoke should be less present because of those westerly winds. But we did want to look also at the like what happened this past summer because it's been a while since we did a video. Just do a quick overview of that. And so this is our statewide precipitation ranks for the June through August timeframe. Wanted to highlight that it was pretty dry, not the driest on record, but the seventh driest on record for the entire state of Washington. Now, our precipitation can be a little bit more localized than that, but generally, overall, Washington was pretty dry. As we go into temperature ranks, it didn't feel for most, I think, people, it didn't feel like the summer was overwhelmingly hot. But what we've seen is as we got into August and September, it just really hasn't started cooling down that much. And so we just had one of the latest times that Seattle or SeaTac Airport has ever hit 90 degrees earlier this week. And that led to, and obviously that was in September, but this June to August timeframe ended up being about the fourth warmest on record. So another quite warm summer, especially east of the Cascades, where it was very warm. And west of the Cascades, it was still above average. Another bad year for the glaciers. This is another one of the worst years on record for the glaciers. And wanted to just highlight this a little bit more in terms of how we're doing for the year so far and why some of these fires are happening. So we can see that over the last roughly 4 months, last 120 days, precipitation on across the state has been anywhere from kind of the 10 to 50% range, a little bit higher in some places, but that's generally average, or kind of what we've averaged over the state. Since the beginning of the year, we've also been below normal, so it's not like the dry time of the year has been below normal. We also had a drier than normal sections during the spring as well, so more in that kind of 50 to 70% range. And then also looking at temperatures, as I was mentioning for this past month. So this is from the middle of August to the middle of September. You can see that it's been relatively warm, about 2 to 4 degrees above average on the west side, but the east side is really where it's been quite hot, 6 to 8, even 10 degrees above normal in some places. So quite a bit warmer than normal. And then wanted to give one shout out, kind of looking to the long range as we are getting into that time frame where the fall colors are popping. We're a couple weeks from Larch season, and it does look like we're starting to get like it does seem like some storms are popping up on the horizon. So this is looking quite a ways out, more than 10 days, looking through the end of next weekend. And the last couple of days, it was looking like maybe next weekend was going to be pretty wet. It's backed off a little bit from that, and so it's something to be aware of. It looks like there will be kind of an atmospheric river pattern setting up somewhere, and the question is whether it's going to be like much further to north, like even north of Vancouver Island, or if it's going to sag a little bit south. Um, but it does look like we are kind of seeing that start of that appear, that storm system, and because it is that time of year, which is honestly kind of good news because the fire we need it to help tamp down some of those fires, and also like some of the previous years it didn't really kick off until mid-October, so it's much better when it starts in mid to late September.
Well, thank you to everyone for listening, and we hope you have a great weekend.